Welcome to An Hour of Power. I am Keith Anthony Blanchard, spiritual teacher, musician, author of the best-selling book Homecoming: Crossing the Bridge to the Soul, and your host of Center of Light. Let's dive in. Welcome to Center of Light. The clearer we become, the greater in might we are. I've been spending all day today watching the Mahashivratri Festival, 12-hour event with lots of beautiful friends, souls, tribe members. It's powerful. We checked the Schumann resonance scale, and it's fantastic. Welcome to Center of Light, Center of Divine Foldment and Reinforcement. Strap in, all my brother and sister astronauts, as we launch for inner space via my guest today, Lionel, I hope I get his name right, Friedberg, via Africa, and his journey into the fire of whatever that is important to him, just like all of us. We're all trying to move not only forward, but we do that by moving inward, upward, forward, toward a beautiful, great possibility. My bestseller, Homecoming: Crossing the Bridge to the Soul, that book right there. Just my bestseller. Thank you, Gavin Lee Davies. You can purchase that book on Amazon. You can also use that same link to hyperjump to Amazon to leave me a review. Excuse me, if you have read the book. Thank you very much, and thank you for supporting Center of Light for 11 years. I'm in it to win it. I'm in it for real. Let me find my notes and tell you about my phenomenal, very well likable, said by many of a man. First thing I'm going to do is grab his information and drop it into these platforms really quick. And I'm going to tell you a little backstory on this wonderful man who's done lots of wonderful things and changed a lot of people's lives. Lionel Friedberg is the man who brought us television shows such as Ancient Mysteries, Mysteries of the Bible, and History's Mysteries for the Discovery Channel. Let me make sure everything is engaged. I don't have to repeat myself. I've got such a lot of technology, forgive me. History Channel and National Geographic. His latest incredible book brings us on an adventure of shamanism, near-death experience, interviews with the dead, UFO encounters, he has photographs, and strange paranormal encounters during his world travels as a Hollywood documentary filmmaker. Lionel Friedman, did I say Friedberg? I don't know which one it is. I think it's Friedberg. I'm going to stay with that. I don't know how that changed, what that is. His latest book brings us on this amazing journey. Lionel, my friend, has documented and experienced all manner of incredible paranormal and spiritual phenomena as the producer and writer of some of the most popular TV shows on these topics ever broadcast. Forever in my veins, his new book, How Film Led Me to the Mysterious World of the African Shaman, is the highly anticipated book by the Hollywood director, writer, and producer, Discovery Channel and History Channel, Lionel Friedberg, I believe is what it is. Shame on me, I don't know how they got twisted. Gavin? Jeez. His observations has taught him that life is far more complex and infinitely stranger than we can imagine. A thrilling ride into the rich culture and diversity of Africa, its spiritual dimensions, and alternative healing methods comes in as support of this wonderful book. For the second time, we go around, Mr. Friedberg. Welcome to the Center of Light.
Hi, Keith.
How are you, sir?
It is great to be with you, and I'm so pleased we've sorted out all these little technical hassles. It's great to be with you today. Thanks for having me on your show.
Absolutely, sir. You're welcome here anytime. I already know that. The first time you and I were going to chat, the night before,
Yeah.
I go to sleep. And I'm thrown into an experience with Lionel Friedberg.
Wow.
And you told me in this experience, Keith, when I come on your show, ask me, share with me this, to bring up, did the shaman woman ever tell you about your name being Lionel, Lion? That you have, has she ever told you that you have the heart of the lion as to why your name that you selected this time around and all this unfoldment. This is what he has from this experience to bring to the fore.
Wow, that's very interesting. As far as I know, the reason why I have the name Lionel is my mother was a great fan of the movies, and her favorite movie star was Lionel Barrymore. And she fell in love with this guy. So when she had her only child, me, she decided to call me Lionel Barrymore after her great, heartthrob. Why Lionel Barrymore? I've no idea, because I've seen a lot of his movies on Turner Classic Movies and wherever else. What she saw in this guy as being a heartthrob, I have no idea. But that's as far as I know why I carry this name. But your dream is really interesting, because the essence of the lion kind of pulses through me in many ways. The lion is almost the symbol of Africa. When people think about Africa, the first thing you think about is a lion walking across the sunset, kind of like the cheetah artwork that we had at the beginning of your show, against the setting sun, which is beautiful, by the way. I think it's just spectacular artwork. But the lion is the symbol of Africa. And the title of my book, Forever in My Veins, really does refer to the fact that I'm a white dude, right? And I'm a Caucasian. But when I think of myself as an African American, because I was born in Africa. And the pulse of the continent and all its mysteries and its histories and its antiquities, and so much about the wonders of that continent, and of which there are more than I can cover in hours of just yakking away. That pulses right through my veins. It's really part of what defines me. And it gave me a very, very curious spirit about the world. It made me an infectiously curious guy. I just wanted to know about absolutely everything. And that's my drive. And I think that is what Africa gave me, because you never know what lies beyond the horizon. You never know what lies on the other side of that corner, be it in the jungle or on the savannah or in the desert or wherever in Africa. Africa is so chock full of mysteries and wonders and beauties and stuff that we can learn from. We all live. I've been living in the States now for nearly 40 years, and I've been coming to this country, ever since I was in my 20s. But essentially, my career began in Central Africa in television, and that gave me my drive. That gave me my curiosity. So it's so interesting to hear you say that about that dream of yours. It's about wanting to know more. I will never know enough. And I've told all my kids, I have kids who live in Chicago, San Francisco, and London in England. And I've told all of them, I said to them, if you do one thing in your life, this is the thing that you should do. Learn one new thing in your life every day. And as long as you can continue to do that and keep expanding your horizons and expanding your consciousness and raising your inquiry level, you will be living a life of quality. And you will be living a life of revelation that will drive you forward. And you will, the stars, that's, are reachable. You can get there by being inquiring and inquisitive and wanting to know more. Because, wow, this universe, this cosmos in which we live is an extraordinary place. And the place to learn that lesson for me was running around the wilds of Africa, looking up at the stars at night. And just meeting extraordinary people drove me. So I was ready for all of that when I came here and started working with organizations like National Geographic and the Discovery Channel and NASA, and on and on and on, the National Academy of Sciences, you name it. I was ready. I was ready to just keep picking away and find out as much as I possibly could. And as a documentary filmmaker, your drive is to get to peel away every layer of the onion skin until you get to the core, the kernel of the person or the subject matter that you're inquiring about, or that you're making a movie about, whether it's about a bottle of mineral water or about a quest to discover what lies on Neptune. It doesn't matter what it is. You've got to keep peeling away those layers. And whether it's an individual or a group of people or an institution or an idea, just keep peeling away until you get to the essence of things. And thank God for Africa, because that's what it did for me.
Being a writer, I failed English 4 times. The reason I had to quit school, and I failed typing twice. And I'm an author, best-selling author. That being said, is for the sake of the point, not for a shameless plug. This lady who I just met, I heard you an author. I said, yes, ma'am. She goes, do you have a spare copy? And I said, sure. It was in a document. And then she started ripping the book apart. And she was so good at what she did. She reduced however much of this text down to a paragraph. Now she says, read it. So it's removing the extraneous stuff, becoming the sculpture, finding the David. Is that what you're referring to? Finding the essence of what it actually is. Correct. That can, fantastic.
Yeah. Go right down to the cork level, get down to the lowest level you possibly can. There's a great movie, by the way, made by a friend of mine called Bailey Sillick. It was made in IMAX years ago. It should have won the Academy Award that year for Best Documentary Film, and it was called Cosmic Voyage. And it was based on an idea of a documentary that came out in the 60s called The Power of 10. And what that movie was about was you step back 10 times to the power of 10. In looking at the world in which we live, and then you step in. So you go to the macro world of the universe, and then you go into the microcosm of the world we live in. And Bailey took this idea and he made an incredible documentary film called Cosmic Voyage, of these kids playing in a town square in Holland. And they've got these like hula hoop things, and they're playing with those. And then you step back 10 feet. And then you multiply that by 10 and by 10 and by 10 and by 10 until eventually you're seeing the entire known universe as we know it, and looking at black holes and looking at galaxies and looking at as much as we know about the universe when he made that movie, which was back in the 70s. And then you go the reverse. You go back into this little town where these kids are playing, and now you start going inwards 10 times to the power of 10. Until you are left with the cork, the tiniest known level of matter. It's a spectacular movie, and it should have won the Oscar. By the way, the score of that film is just something to die for. It's just brilliant. But the movie really provokes the mind, and it prompts you to just want to know so much about the world we live in. It's fabulous. And, that's what it's all about. Go as far away as you can. I call it putting on a wide lens, putting on the widest lens you've got, but never ever forget the tiniest, tiniest, tiniest particle that lies at the bottom of things.
I want to dive into knowing a little bit more about the shaman woman. The through line in your book is that everything came to pass in your life. That just totally, as a spiritual aspirant, that just fascinates me. You were talking a little earlier about, we should all want to know more. Well, she knew a heck of a lot more and had the gift of sight. And please tell me about the unfoldment of this prophecy known as your life.
And the real tragedy is that I never knew her name. I never found out what this woman's name was. But I need a little bit of backstory to tell you here, to put it all into context. I was an only child. I grew up in South Africa during the apartheid system, which was an awful social system that was enshrined in the Book of Law. Everything was separated: beaches, churches, banks, stores, separate entrances for everybody. And as a child, I was very aware of the fact that this wasn't exactly the way things should be at all. And my father was an immigrant from Latvia. He came to Africa from Latvia, and by trade he was a watchmaker. He would fix little mechanical things. The days when all watches were mechanical, he would live in this micro world of little coil springs and cogs and stuff. And he married a South African woman, my mother, and he knew, and it was obvious that this apartheid system was just not the way one should live one's life at all. So in 1960, and that was the year that I finished high school, by the way, he decided to leave the country, and he decided to take a job in a British colony in the middle of Central Africa called Northern Rhodesia, and Northern Rhodesia sat right on the southern border of the Belgian Congo. And that was the year that the Belgians gave up the Congo, and the Congo became independent, and was the beginning of the Congo wars, which have never stopped to this day. I mean, the Congo has been aflame ever since. And it's one of the great tragedies of the world, because it is one of the most magnificent places, and it is rich in life and history and ecosystems and jungles and you name it. It's all in the Congo, and wonderful people. But it's been ravaged by war. But that aside, right to the south of it was this territory called Northern Rhodesia, which was a British colony. And my dad took a job there in a jeweler store as a watchmaker, because he said, I got to get out of South Africa. We got to get out of here. We got to move away from apartheid. And so they've decided to move up to this little tiny town, which was part of a copper mining area on the south of the Congo. And when that happened, I thought, wow, I'm going with you guys. And my mother said, you're not. You are going to college. You're going to go to university. You're going to get yourself a degree. You're going to get yourself a career. You're going to get yourself a life. That's what you're going to do. But the weakness and the problem was, my mother was an infectious movie lover, and I used to go to the movies with her ever since I was 5 years old, and I fell in love with the movies. And when I was 11, a cousin of mine gave me a used movie camera. Now, remember, this is the day of film, 8mm film. And so I made films about my buddies' birthday parties, sporting events at school, that kind of stuff. I loved the movies. And when my parents decided to go and live in Northern Rhodesia, I thought, wow, here's my chance to go and make all these movies that I'd seen in the local bug house down the road. Tarzan, The African Queen, King Solomon's Mines. I wanted to do that. So I said, I'm coming with you guys. I mean, how naive can you be, right? And I did. I followed them up there. And of course, when I arrived, I was quite horrified, because there was nothing. There was a copper mining town, boom, a great big open pit, a small town, and around it, bush and jungle from horizon to horizon. Certainly no film industry and no opportunities to become a filmmaker. But they were building a little television station in one of these copper mining towns. It was a British company that owned the company, and they were building the first television station in Central Africa. And by hook or by crook, I wanted a job there, and I got it. And they gave me a job, and it took about 6 months for me to get behind one of those cameras in the studio, because I was good, and I could find compositions really, really quickly, particularly on live shows. And the studio manager said, you're good. We'll put you behind one of those cameras. So my career began that way. I was young, I was just out of high school. And this went on for about 3 years, and it was fantastic, because Britain was giving away all its colonies. The British Empire was falling apart. And Northern Rhodesia was about to be given its independence and was about to become the Republic of Zambia, which is what it's called today. When that happened, the new government, the black government, nationalized the station. They took it over. And they said to all the white folks who lived there, who worked there, they said, you've done a great job for the last 3 or 4 years, but thanks very much. We no longer need your services. Goodbye. You're out of here in 6 months. We all got pink slips. And it was totally understandable. Our jobs were going to go to local people, which is correct. That seemed fair to all of us. But for most of the staff who had originally come from Europe and from England, it was fine for them. They could go back home again. But what was I going to do? And so my big dilemma was, what was I going to do with my life now that I'd lost my job in this little television station? And fortunately, we had a guy working for us at home, whose name was David Phiri. He was a member of the Bemba tribe and ethnic group. And he was a terrific guy. He used to mow the lawn, do the dishes, do all the sort of thing that, servants did for white folks back in those days. And I said to him, David, a terrible thing has happened. And he said, what? I said, I've lost my job. And he said, oh, so what are you going to do? And I said, well, I don't want to go back to South Africa, because there's this thing called apartheid down there. You don't want to know about that. I don't want to go back there. I don't know what to do with my life. And he said, he thought of me. He wasn't much older than me. And he said, I will find someone to help you find your way. And I said, like who? And he said, leave it to me. I'll find you someone. So 2 or 3 days later, there he was, David and I, in my little beat up old VW Beetle on a dirt road going through the bush.
I can't imagine that. That's just the picture you painted is amazing.
And we went to this little village, which we had visited before, because on my day off and on his day off, David used to come with me, and I still, made home movies about tribes and about tribal culture and whatever else. I loved all that stuff. And we went back to this little village, and he said, there's a lady who lives right at the end of the village. We must find her hut. She is the person who's going to tell you what to do. And I said, but how will she know? Who is she? He said, don't ask. Let's just go there. So we found this little isolated hut on the end of this compound, and he knocked on the door, and this ancient little old woman came along. She was all withered and, wrinkled. She opened the door. She spoke no English at all. And she invited us into her house. There were like maybe two rooms, a front room and a back room inside, which I didn't see, but we were invited into the front room. And on the floor of this room was a grass mat. And on this grass mat was a little animal skin bag. And she told us to sit down. Now, Africa, you don't ask questions. Things happen amazingly and mysteriously. Don't ask. That is the way Africa works. I didn't ask David how he knew about this woman, or, how she was recommended, or what she was going to do for me. You just don't do that, because in Africa, things just happen, according to where the sun is in the sky. It's that kind of mysterious and wonderful place. I sat down, and she said to me, via David, tell him to pick up that little bag sitting on the grass mat and shake it, and then open it up and blow into it, which I did. And when I picked it up, I could hear clink, 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 clink. It sounded like marbles or something inside. I blew into it, and she said to David, to tell me, say your name into the bag, which I did. And then she offered me a little tin, which had some snuff in it. Snuff is ground tobacco leaves. And she said to me, you take some snuff and you offer it into the bag. That is an offering to your ancestors. To my what? To my ancestors. She said, your ancestors, because they will be here to help you, tell me to tell you what to do. And I, sprinkled this snuff inside the bag, not having a clue what was going on. And then she took the bag and she shook it and she turned it upside down. And all these bones and little pebbles and little trinkets fell out onto the grass mat. Now, the paradigm for these shamans in Africa, in Zambia, they call them ngangas. In South Africa, which is where I met most of these shamans, they call themselves sangomas. Sangoma is a Zulu word, for soothsayer, for a person who can see into the future, who can help you with whatever issue you have. And anyway, so she turned this bag upside down, and all these little bones fell out. Now, the bones have to consist of parts of certain animals. A little bone from a crocodile, one from a hyena, one from a lion, one from some kind of antelope. I can't go into all the details, but I list them in the book. And other little bits and pieces that these shamans add to their collection in order to help them interpret what the patient or the person who's come to consult them needs to know. And the idea is this, that my ancestors are influencing the way these bones fall on the grass mat. And her ancestors, the shaman's ancestors, are the ones interpreting the pattern that the bones have fallen on the mat. In other words, if the lion bone falls across the antelope bone, it means some sort of opposing or strong power is going to overcome you, etc., etc. That's the way, it's interpreted. Far more complicated than that, of course. But anyway, so she looks at this pile of bones, and the first thing she does was, oh my God, she leans back and covers her eyes. And she says to David, I can't see anything. I can see. The place where he's working, these bright lights, I can't see anything. Well, what had she seen? She had seen the lights in the television station where I worked. Now, she'd had no idea what I did for a living. When I heard her say that, I said to myself, you better pay real careful attention to what this lady is going to tell you, because there's no BS going on here. She is seeing things that you are not seeing, lying in that pattern of bones. She's obviously interpreting what she's seeing. She's seeing visions. You better listen to what she says. So she started to babble stuff that went on for about an hour. And David, this guy with me, my interpreter, thank goodness, he was trying his best to keep pace with her, with all the stuff that she was saying. And one of the first things she said, and this is what I wanted to hear, was, you tell him that he's going to go across the big, big water. And he's going to go into that direction. And she points to the north over her shoulder, which is to the north. I had no idea what that meant. He's going to cross the big water to that direction, to the north. What did that mean? And then she tells him things like, and one day in his work, he's going to go to a place where there are more lights and many famous people. She told him about that I would be married twice. She told him how many children I would have. And I'm a young guy, I was like 21 years of age. And she tells him all of these things. And she says to him, tell him one day he will go to a world where there is no color at all. Everything is white. There is no color in this place at all. But he will go there for his work. I had no idea what that meant. She said to him, tell him that one day for his work, he will be in the bush and his life will be in danger from the great beast. He may almost die from that. He must be very, very careful. When I heard this, I nearly freaked out. I thought, what on earth is this woman talking about? And she went on and on and on with things like that. And then one of the most extraordinary things that she told him was, you tell him that one day he will meet a man who was very, very close to the most evil person, the most evil man who ever lived. And I thought, what on earth is that about? Anyway, look, I filed all this stuff away, some of it in my mind, some of it in notebooks. And it was only as the years went by, when all these things became to pass, that I realized how accurate this woman was in her predictions, in her visions, if you like. The first thing that came to pass was I had to eventually leave Zambia because there was nothing for me to do. So I did go back to South Africa and worked in the film industry for a while. But then I decided I got to get out of here. And so I emigrated to Canada. It was almost impossible to get a visa to come to the States back in those days, during the apartheid days. But it was a little simpler to get a visa to go to Canada. So I emigrated to Canada. And those days, I'm talking about the year 1966 now. You didn't fly, you went by sea. Most people went by sea, particularly if you had lots of bags, like I was emigrating. This is before the days of mass air travel. So I went by sea, and I was halfway on the journey from Cape Town to Southampton. It was a 14-day journey. And one night I went up to the top deck of the ship, and I used to go and look at the stars every single night. And I was up there one night and I was looking at the sky and I thought, wow, I'm really conscious of the fact that the sky is changing. Every night, the stars are changing their patterns. I really felt that I was moving from one hemisphere of the planet to another. I was going from south to north, and sea travel, because it's slower than air travel, you can sense that because the sky does change at night, particularly over a period of 2 weeks. And then I suddenly realized, but not only that, I'm going in a northerly direction and I'm traveling on the Atlantic Ocean. Is this the big water that this lady was talking about? I will cross the great water into a northern direction, and that's exactly what I'm doing. She foresaw that. And from that moment onwards, I kept myself very tuned into the fact that whatever was going to happen in my life, you better keep tabs about some of the things that maybe she told you that may come to pass. And by golly, they did. They all eventually came to pass, including the beast, the white world, the most evil man. And I can explain to you what all of those were. But every single thing that this old lady had told me came true.
I would like to know what those are, but I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
When these little things would fire off, these comings together, these alignments, these synchronicities, when you had the realization, oh my God, I'm traveling the great water, and
Yes.
What is the feeling that happens inside? The connection of the realization?
No, it was amazement. It was It was amazement, and it gave me, I think, eventually, as these things came to pass, and she told me lots of things, by the way, it gave me a profound respect for what she represented and for the world that she represented. and from the world that this little old lady had come from. Remember, she lived in the middle of the African jungle. She'd probably never been more than 20 miles away from where she was born. How did she know about all of these things? She went to no college or university, probably not even just school. What was she tapping into? What was the mechanism that was at her disposal to allow all these things to happen to her, that she could impart them to me? So it gave me a profound respect for that whole world. And it's one that I have nurtured to this day. And, eventually in the 70s, I made a series of films called The Tribal Identity, which looked at all the major tribes of Southern Africa. And I went there in absolute humility, because I knew that I was going to discover worlds that I had no idea what they were about, or what the cultures were about, or their spiritual practices were about, or their histories were about. And I learned this as I made these shows. So it gave me a respect for people that I knew nothing about. It gave me a sense of wonderment. And, that just grew and grew and grew as these events unfolded. Because how is it possible for this to happen? And, at the end of my book, and my book is filled with dozens of stories like this. And the very last page, I say that, I do believe that there is an invisible grid, a network, a field, if you like. Think of it as the Force in Star Wars, if you want. We're all connected to that, all of us. And we can all access that. That woman certainly did. And I think we all have that capacity to do that. And I think that this exists on a cosmic level. We are all able to tap into some kind of vast cosmic field that unites us all, whether we're human or whether we are extraterrestrial or whatever we may be, or whether we're an ant or whatever it may be. We're all connected to this field. I am absolutely convinced of that. That's the takeaway lesson of my life, that we're all united, we're all bound by an energy field that connects us all.
She would have to be to have such information about all. I mean, we have to be connected in some form or fashion to be able to know a something or someone. For example, the Master Jesus. How did he turn water into wine? Because they was connected to the alchemic process of changing said water into wine. It's a part of his own body. This is so fascinating to me, sir. Are you doing anything currently in film? And if you would, I would still like to know some of those prophetic unfoldments. What was the beast? What was the water? I mean, all that.
I'll give you some of those. Yeah,
Sure.
in fact, I'm writing a sci-fi story at the moment, which it's going to take 2 years of my life, no doubt, as a novel. But I want to see it eventually reach the screen as a movie. But I've got another book coming out in July. It's a history of aviation and aviation in Africa, which is a fascinating story. I mean, Africa was always known as the dark continent, no airports, no airfields, no weather forecasting, none of that stuff. And the story of aviation in Africa is an amazing adventure story. And I wrote that in a book which comes out in July. So, I've been busy, but I'm concentrating now on this big sci-fi idea of mine. And I've spoken to a number of my friends about it, but I don't want to verbalize too much about it, because you've got to sort of, you don't want anything to escape out of the bag. It's got to be nurtured and developed and given its own time to grow, and that's where I'm at the moment. But some of these predictions that this little old woman had told me, for example, let's take the great beast in the bush that almost will take your life, she said to me. Well, the year is 1967. I'm back in South Africa, and I get a call one day from a guy saying there are 3 guys coming from the United States. They are going to the country called Mozambique. Mozambique was right on South Africa's border. It was a colony of Portugal, where everyone spoke Portuguese. In fact, Portugal virtually regarded it as a province, would you believe, during the colonial days. That's the kind of arrogance people had. So here's this big territory in Africa regarded as a province of Portugal. But anyway, it was rich in wildlife, and there were lots of hunting concessions all over the place. So I get a call about 3 guys coming out from California who are going on a hunting safari. and they wanted a movie made about their safari. Would I be interested in the job? And I thought to myself, first of all, hunting is something that absolutely is abhorrent to me. I see no point in that at all. It's never made sense to me what fun there can be in shooting innocent animals, wildlife, or whatever for fun. I don't understand it at all. So that's why I took the job. I wanted to know what made these guys tick. Why did they do that? And what was there in that that could be possibly regarded as a sport? So I said, yeah, I'll take the job. So it was me and a camera kit, 16mm film, and off I go to Mozambique, and I meet up with these guys. The main guy was a man called Spud Millen. Now, Spud Millen made millions and millions and millions of dollars with his toy company by marketing the hula hoop, which was a fad that took the world by storm in the 50s. Even I had a hula hoop in South Africa. People had hula hoops all over the world, right? But he also made a fortune out of the frisbee because he'd seen it being used by some tribal group somewhere or other, and he developed it, and he made it out of plastic. And so, frisbees was his invention, and he made a great deal of money out of it. An extremely nice guy. And he was there with two buddies of his. One was a stockbroker, and the other one was a lawyer, and they came to Mozambique on a hunting safari. So I meet up with them, and off we go into the wild blue yonder with two other white hunters leading the way to go on this hunting safari. And they shoot, they all had licenses to shoot all kinds of animals, which I found absolutely abhorrent. But there I was. My job was to film all of this. I'd had discussions with them at night to say, why do you guys do this? And, what's the fun of it? And they'd say, look, forget about it. People have been doing it for millions of years. You ain't going to change anything. So, leave us alone. So I wasn't going to argue with that, and I did my job. I covered the events. Now, one day it was the turn of one of these guys. I think it was the stockbroker. I'm not going to mention names because he might still be alive. And it was his turn to shoot an elephant. They all had a license to shoot one elephant each, and this guy was not a very good shot. So we followed a herd on foot, by the way. And we slept in the bush one particular night where the entire herd surrounded us. And I described this in the book. It was the scariest thing I've ever experienced. Being surrounded in the darkness of the African night by a herd of elephants, and all you could hear was the rumbling of their hearts and the sort of slow swishing of their ears, but you couldn't see anything except every now and then a bit of glint of light.
Lionel, you could actually hear the rumbling of their hearts?
Yeah, these elephants are big critters. They are
right.
big. You can hear their bellies and their heartbeats. Absolutely.
Right.
And they surrounded us. And, the white hunter said to me the next day, he said, those elephants came. They were almost coming to tell us that they knew that we were after them. It's almost as though they were there to tell us that they could destroy us like that night. But they didn't. They wanted us to leave them alone, leave them in peace. He totally believed that, and I totally believe that to this day. That's what that was all about. Nevertheless, the next morning, we're off again in pursuit of this elephant for this guy, and we found a herd. And Wally, who was one of the main white hunters, he picks out an old bull on the edge of the herd, and he says to this guy, he says, "That's the one that you should shoot, but make sure you try and get a clean kill right between the eyes, if you can." But as I said to you before, this guy was not a good shot at all. So he shoots, and he misses completely. And the herd goes crazy. They stampeded in every direction, and it was like an earthquake and dust. And I had been positioned right behind him for the shot. When he took his shot, I wanted to get my shot behind him, shooting the elephants. That was the idea. And all I could hear was, as these elephants scattered, I heard run, run, run from the white hunters, because one elephant remained static in the middle of where that herd had been standing, and was a female. And the reason why she had remained there was because she was guarding her baby. There was a baby elephant next to her. It was her calf. And she looked in the direction where I was, in other words, to where this hunter had been with his gun. And she started to stampede. She knew that her calf might be in danger. She knew what gunshot meant. And she started to stampede to kill this guy. She really wanted to kill him. and he was in front of me with his rifle. Well, he ran out of my shot as quick as can be, and I just kept running film on because I was rooted. I was frozen in time. I couldn't move. And all I could hear was, Lionel, run, run, run. I couldn't. I could not move. And all I could see in my viewfinder was this elephant getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger in my viewfinder. And when she was about 10 feet away from me, and I heard over my shoulder, bam! The white hunter, the guy, the leader of the safari, shot her right between her eyes. And she crumpled onto her front legs. She locked her eyes with mine. She was after the hunter who obviously had threatened her baby, not me. I know that much. And she looked at me, though, when she was shot, and her eye started to glaze over. And if you've ever seen an elephant's eye, it's like if you've ever looked into the eye of a whale, or an octopus for that matter, or an elephant, what you're seeing there is antiquity. What you're seeing is wisdom. You're seeing into the soul of this being. And she collapsed on her front legs, and her eyes started to glaze over, and then she collapsed. But she held my eyesight in her eyesight until her eyes completely glazed over, and this poor cow died. And I felt something very strange happen. I felt her soul connecting with mine. We made that tangible connection. I am absolutely convinced of the fact that that soul of that elephant joined with mine in some weird kind of symbiotic way the moment that poor creature's life ebbed from her body. Because as I was sitting that night back in base camp, and everybody, the martinis were flowing and the vodka was flowing and whatever, and I was sitting on the edge of things, just processing the day. And I thought, you could have been killed today. That elephant could have run straight into you. She wasn't after you. She was after the guy who pulled the trigger. But she couldn't stop herself. She would have run right into you and killed you. And your life was spared today. And that elephant, I think, almost has forgiven you and has joined with you in some mysterious way. I was just totally aware of that. And I sort of filed that away. And then suddenly, my God, it hit me. That woman told me, be care of the great beast, because it will almost take your life in the bush one day as part of your work. She foresaw that event as well. That little old lady in her mud hut in Central Africa, a decade before, And so, that is one of the many events. Let's take the white world that she predicted to me.
Mr. Friedberg, if you cannot take a breath, that was just rich and delicious and full of wildness for me. Does she still visit you? Do you have glimpses of her, feelings, impressions of her, be it in sleepscape or just everyday life?
Are you talking about the elephant?
Both. The elephant and/or the shaman woman, which I think they're one and the same.
The shaman woman went out of my life, and as I said to you, I don't even know what her name was, but you know what? That elephant has been with me ever since. And I'll tell you this: I have consulted many, many shamans, sangomas, as I called them earlier, many, many times in subsequent years, because I developed a serious illness which took me back to Africa, and I thought, if anyone can heal me, maybe these shamans of Africa can do it. And every time they've thrown the bones, I'm talking about 20, 30 times, they've thrown the bones, different shamans, they've thrown the bones, and every single time they've always said to me, what is this elephant that we can see in your bones? The spirit of that creature has remained with me. As a guide, as a guardian, as a presence, she's with me. I know that. I mean, my office, it's covered in elephants. I have an elephant hanging from my rear view mirror in my car. There's elephants all over my life. But the spirit of that female protecting her baby who was shot in front of me, she's with me to this day. And I know that she's kind of been a protective force. Of that, I have no question.
I was going to ask you, do you find since then or present now in your life that you find that obstacles are easily moved out of your way?
Not in the least. The obstacles.
She's just protecting you from them.
I think she saved my life many times. I mean, My life has been in danger many, many, many times. And, I was almost on a ship that capsized in the ocean once. And that's another thing that this woman protected, by the way, predicted. She said, the big water one day will try to take your life. Well, I was on a research mission in the South Atlantic, and our ship almost capsized. I think, that this elephant was a protective measure then and saved my life. Maybe, but, we didn't die. And I survived this illness that I've had for years and years, which we can talk about in detail later if you want. But let me tell you about another thing that she told me was, you will meet the man who was very, very close to the most evil man who ever lived. And I'll tell you how that came about. And the year was 1984, and I was doing a series of television documentaries on the history of South African Airways. South African Airways was once one of the great international airlines of the world. And it connected South Africa with every continent on the planet. And its history was absolutely fascinating. It pioneered air travel throughout the African continent when there was nothing. There were no airfields or anything like that. And it was a fascinating history. When I was doing these documentaries about the history of the airline, I had found out that in 1934, which is just after the airline began, they ordered from a factory in Germany, the Junkers airplane factory in Germany, a number of new airliners. They were state of the art of their time. They accommodated about 14 passengers. They were bigger than anything else in the fleet at the time. They were, amazing airplanes. Very similar to, if anyone knows about aviation who's watching the show, like the old Ford Trimotor. These were metal aircraft with 3 engines. And so they ordered 3 of these from this factory in Germany. Now, to fly these aircraft all the way from Germany down to Johannesburg, down the African continent, was a major accomplishment in itself. No weather forecasting, no alternative airfields. Where do you get fuel? How do you do this? So it was a 2-week operation. And when we were doing our research for the documentary, we found out that one of the pilots who ferried one of these flights out was still alive. And I thought, oh my God, I've got to interview this guy. So my researcher found out that he had retired. He was like 89 years of age at the time, and that he had retired in a little town in Bavaria. And through the German government, through the Foreign Office, we got permission to go and interview the guy. And so when it came time for us to go to Germany to go and do this, we were in Frankfurt and doing filming on some other aspect of the documentary. And then the time came for us to go and interview this man. And a member of the Foreign Office of the German government joined us. He was going to be our interpreter. And he was the facilitator who had lined up this guy for us to interview. Because apparently he had a war record, and he was decorated, obviously from the Second World War, because this delivery flight that I'm talking about took place long before the war. And so he joined us, and we went down to this little village where this man had retired, in this little house. And the night before the interview, we stayed in a small hotel. And the guy from the Foreign Office, the German Foreign Office, said to me that night, after drinking lots of really good Rhine wine, good German wine, he says to me, how much do you really know, about this man? His name was Hans Baur, B-A-U-R. And I said, well, not all I know is that, he flew one of these delivery flights of one of these airplanes down Africa, which was a major accomplishment for us. Why? What else is there to know? He said, well, he has a war injury, and, and he's decorated and da-da-da. So please don't discuss World War II. And I said, no, that's not what it's about. It's about that delivery flight. But that didn't satisfy him. So another bottle of wine was ordered. And about 1 o'clock in the morning, he says to me, I have to tell you something. And I said, what? He said, do you realize that Kapitan Hans Baur, the man we're going to interview tomorrow, was actually the personal pilot of Adolf Hitler? Well, I tell you that, when he told me that, I sobered up instantly, because you don't get an opportunity like that every day to interview someone like that. And I've interviewed lots and lots of folks in my time, but this was an unusual opportunity to speak to someone who you don't get an opportunity to meet every day. And so the next day we pull up outside his little house, and his wife, his third wife, She met us at the door, welcomed us inside. My film crew, the publicists, the photographers, the guy from the Foreign Office, members of the airline, members, even members from the German aviation industry. And we all file into the living room of this little house. And we set up, the microphone, the boom, the lights, whatever else for this interview. And eventually this guy comes down from upstairs and he had a limp. So I thought, that's the war injury that I was told he has. Obviously, he'd been shot as a pilot or something had happened to him, and I wasn't going to go there with him at all. But anyway, he came down. And so the man from the German government, from the Foreign Office, who was going to be my interpreter, he introduced himself to this guy. And then he introduced this man to me. And, when I shook his hand, we often talk about the 6 degrees of separation. Well, this was 1 degree of separation. How many times I thought to myself, had Adolf Hitler actually shaken that very hand that I'm shaking now? That's a unique opportunity. I was almost sensing the fact that, Hitler's imprint, the energy of Adolf Hitler could still be felt in this man's handshake. That's how close he was to the Führer, who led the war into battle and was one of the greatest mass murderers of all time.
Can I ask you, if it's not too personal?
Yeah.
In that realization, in the shaking of that hand,
yeah,
how did you feel?
I was utterly not sure of how to behave. I just wanted to keep a straight face as possible, but it was an overwhelming feeling. You don't get closer to, you imagine that, meeting someone who is that close to Hitler. So anyway, we do the interview. I ask the questions in English, and this guy from the Foreign Office translates into German. The guy answers in German. We get 15 minutes of really good screen time out of him. And at the end of it, I said, thank you very much. We're done. We're finished. And the guy gets up and he says to me, come over here. And he asks me, and he takes me to a corner of the living room. And there's a big framed photograph there of him in his uniform with Adolf Hitler standing in front of one of these airplanes that we've just been discussing in the interview. And he points to the aircraft and he says, that's a Ju-52, which is like one of those airplanes that I flew to South Africa. I said, yeah, that's very interesting. And then he looks at me as if to say, do you want to know more about the photograph? Do you want to know about the other guy in the photograph? And he says to me in German, he says, do you want to know about the two of us? And I said to him, yes, please. Well, remember, the guy from the Foreign Office says, don't discuss World War II. But when I said yes, the guy just covered it. This man from the Foreign Office just goes like this. He says, here we go. We're opening up this can of worms. But it was his offer. And he says, come and sit down with me on the couch, which we do. And he calls his wife and he says to the wife, first of all, bring snacks, bring drinks, which she does, on a big silver tray for the whole crew, everybody. And, snacks. And then he says to her, please bring the photograph albums, which she does, leather-bound photograph albums. And he puts them on a little table in front of us, and he starts opening up the pages. And it is a pictorial record of the inner ranks of the Third Reich. And he is in every third or fourth or fifth photograph. He's in all of them. Wherever Hitler is, you can always see him somewhere in the background. He's always there. That's how close these two guys were. Hitler didn't trust anybody. He knew his life was always in danger. He always knew that someone was always after him, even among those very, very close to him in the Reich. But this guy, Hans Bauer, he was very close to him. And Hans Bauer tells me that when he married his first wife, Hitler gave him his wedding party in Hitler's apartment in Munich. That's how close they were. They were buddies, and they were very tight. And so, he talks about this man. He said how nice he was to his family and all the rest of it. And I was just totally and utterly intrigued. And you could recognize everybody, Goebbels, Goering, everybody in all these images. And you can see pictures of Hitler dining with Mussolini. And always in the background is Hans Bauer. He's always there because he said, Hitler always made place for me at the table and, always thought about me and was always sensitive to me being around. And, he was very, very kind to me. And I was intrigued by all of this. So comes the end of the day. I said to the guys, let's wrap up, the cables, the boom, the camera, everything. It's like 5 o'clock, time to go. And I thanked him, and we left the house, and we're driving away. And as we were driving away from this house, I looked back out of the rear window of this van that we were in, and he was standing outside his house, with his cane, waving like that with his wife. And it suddenly hit me, oh my God, as he disappeared around the corner, this woman had foreseen this. She said, "You will meet a man as part of your work who knew the most evil man who ever lived." That has just happened.
For the umpteenth time.
Yeah. And it went on and on and on like that. There were so many incidents that woman predicted that were just absolutely extraordinary. And, I felt no animosity towards the guy at all. I thought of him as a pilot. I didn't think about him as being a Nazi or as being part of the inner ranking of Hitler's henchmen who ran the Third Reich. That wasn't, I saw him as an old guy who was just reminiscing his memories to me. It was astonishing. And he gave me a copy of his book. He gave me a signed photograph of him with Adolf Hitler. And, he puts to Lionel with best wishes in German, with him and Hitler in their uniforms, with the SS thing on the helmet,
Lionel, we are sadly at the top of the hour. Would you leave us, please, with the story about the land of no color?
Yes. So 1991, I'm working on a PBS series here in the States, of course, for a series called The Infinite Voyage. The Infinite Voyage was a science series made in conjunction with the National Academy of Sciences in DC. And what it was about was a scientific expedition to Antarctica to see whether the ozone hole was getting any bigger and what was causing it, and also whether climate change was a reality or not. Let me just kill my phone here. Or whether climate change was really happening. They didn't call it climate change back in those days. They referred to it as global warming. Is global warming really happening? Is CO2 going up in the atmosphere? The Antarctic is a great place to go to check this out because it's pristine. There's no cities, there are no human population areas there at all. But you can put a temperature, a thermometer into Antarctica and take the temperature of Mother Earth and see if she's well or healthy or not. And things like, is the ocean becoming more acidic? Is it affecting the marine ecosystems? And ice cores, going deep into the ice and bringing out these ice cores and looking at the little bubbles of air trapped in the ice. Has CO2 that is trapped in these ice bubbles, has it gone up over the centuries? You can do this by good scientific research, and that's what they were doing. And this is what we were filming. So we were there, and it was a fascinating experience. I think we were down there for like 6 weeks on this big icebreaker and this research ship, and it was Christmas Day. It was either 1990 or 1991, and the captain was a Norwegian guy, and the ship was filled with American scientists and researchers and my film crew, he says, "No work today. I'm stopping the ship. We're going to party. It's Christmas." So,
y'all should do a lot of partying, don't y'all?
So the chef somehow or another came up with some kind of treats for the evening. The crew, I don't know how they did it, but they sort of made a Christmas tree out of bits and pieces that they found in the cargo bay, with sheets of paper for leaves, whatever else. Anyway, it was Christmas and we were at sea, and the ship had stopped. Now, you don't stop the propellers, by the way. The props keep turning because if you stop the propellers, they may freeze solid. But what you do is you feather the blades so that the ship doesn't have any forward movement. But those props keep turning all the time. So we were static in the water. And when I say the water, that's kind of a misnomer because there was no water. The entire ocean was covered in pack ice. It was white from horizon to horizon in ice. And I had a few drinks down at the bottom, and I said to the guys, "Excuse me, I'm going up on deck. I'm going to just keep my notes up to date," which I do all the time. Every night I used to write everything down. And so I went up on the deck, and I was writing in my notepad, and I was trying to describe this world around me because I wanted to use it for the narration later on when we got back, to the States. And the sort of words I used was, it's like being in a translucent white bubble, because you couldn't see where the sea ended and the horizon began. It was like being inside a big glass egg. Everything was white. The only thing of color was this red hull of our ship. And that's what I wrote in my book. And I suddenly thought, oh my God, this sounds familiar to me. That woman, she said, you will go to a world where there is no color. Everything is white. She foresaw that. Once again, the mystery is, how did she see that in the bones decades before it even happened,
When you went to Antarctica, was there a history of the presence of Nazi Germany there?
Well, I know all about the Nazi presence in Antarctica and the fact that there was a base, but that's not the sort of stuff you discuss among us in a scientific community, because they will laugh you off the ship. But I was aware of that, and of course, since those days, and I'm sure this is 30 years ago, remember, I now know more about that than I did back those days. But and I'm totally, one of the things that I've learned in my time as a documentary filmmaker is you've got to keep a very, very open mind about everything. I'm not gullible. I don't just simply believe what I hear or what people say. I need proof. I need some evidential solidity behind things to back up what folks are saying. So, but I am totally open-minded about that. And I've heard lots of people speak about the fact that there is a Nazi base, and that, there was a Nazi base in Antarctica where they had developed technology that was, basically given by extraterrestrials, and that there is a UFO base, and that the UFOs that were seen over DC just after World War II, were basically Nazi machines, reverse engineered from technology imparted to us by aliens. I'm totally open to all of that, and I think it's absolutely, why should it not be possible that this is all true? I'm absolutely open to that, but I myself have not had any personal proof of that, but I'm open to that. And I've listened to a ton of guys, and I go to Contact in the Desert every year, and I go to conferences every year in Arizona. I do all that stuff. I'm a total UFO fanatic.
Are you familiar with James Gilliland and Trout Lake? James Gilliland?
No, I'm not familiar with that particular one.
I need to introduce you to this cat. This is he lives in Trout Lake, wherever in Washington State, and activity happens on his property every night. In fact, so much so, he may, I don't know if he still does, but invite people to bring your lawn chairs, 10 o'clock at night, let's go outside, and it starts to happen.
Yes. Oh, I don't doubt that for a moment. I don't doubt that for a moment. I have seen a UFO. I filmed a UFO. This was back in Canada in 1966. And if you want that story, I can just try and quickly get that out of the way and tell you about that.
Sure. Why not?
As I said, I emigrated to Canada, and so I joined the National Film Board, which is a terrific documentary production. Today, of course, they do more than just documentaries, but they were, even then, they were world famous for the quality of their documentary movies. And I was working on a film on the history of housing, urban development in Canada. It was just a small crew, 3 of us. So we're in the province of Saskatchewan. And what we needed to do was to go and film at a potash plant. Now, potash is dug out of the ground, and they grinded this stuff up, and they use it in fertilizer. And as they mine this stuff, it makes a lot of dust go up into the atmosphere, and just it sits up there, like a big dust cloud. And so we were staying at a little motel in the middle of nowhere, and Saskatchewan is flat, absolutely flat, like a tabletop, just cornfields everywhere, and this potash plant. So we're staying at a motel, and the next morning we set off towards the plant, and you could see it on the horizon because you could see this plume of dust going up and sitting there in the sky with this big dust cloud, just sitting there stationary. And after about a half an hour or so of driving, we eventually get to the plant, and the guy at the gate says to the director, I wasn't directing. The guy was sitting in the front seat, and the man at the gate says, you better get down to the parking lot as quick as you can, because there's something sitting up there in that dust cloud. So the director says, like, what are you talking about? And the guy says, we don't know what it is, but there's something up there. Oh, really? Well, so anyway, we drive down to the plant itself. The director gets out, meets the manager of the plant, and they go inside to discuss the day's filming. And those are the days of station wagons. We had a station wagon. And I set up my tripod, and I set up the camera, put on a long lens, and looked at this dust cloud as I wanted to see what there was, if there was anything up there. And a few of the other people who worked at the plant came out to the parking lot, smoking and, just shooting the breeze with me and chatting away. And a little breeze came up. And the guy says, you watch. He said, you'll see something. It's there. It's up there. You just keep your eyes open. And I'm training my camera up there looking for something. And as this breeze comes up, I see a glint of metallic looking something or other. It was like a flash from metal foil. And I try to focus on that. It's very difficult to focus on dust because there's nothing sharp, no sharp-edged objects. But as I saw this flash of metal, I kind of try to focus on that area of the dust cloud. And then the breeze continued and this dust cloud dissipated. And there was this disc just sitting up there in the sky, not making a sound, no windows, no methods of propulsion, nothing. Underneath it was like a triangular shape connected to the disc above it via like a tripod structure. And I just pressed the button of the camera. Now we're shooting 16mm film, and I shot about maybe 3 or 5 minutes worth of this thing, just sitting there silently doing nothing. How big was it? A lot of people have asked me that. This was before the days of jumbo jets and 747s, but that's how big this thing was. And I got film of it, and eventually the wind came back and the breeze came back and it got covered up again. And we had to get on with our filming. We were there for a job and that's what we did. So anyway, at the end of the day, I said to the director, I said, I'm going to remove that roll that I shot of whatever that thing was in the cloud and keep it separately so that, maybe somebody will be able to tell us what it was. And he said, sure, just mark it up for the lab because everything had to go to the lab for processing. It's the days of film, long before video. Just mark it up as wait for our arrival, hold for our arrival, unknown subject or something of that nature. So yeah, it was my job to go down to the rail depot that night and send the stuff all the way to Montreal by rail, by Canadian National Railroad or by Canadian Pacific Railroad, and to the lab. And weeks later, we get back to Montreal. And we're sitting in the theater, and now we're sitting through hours and hours of boring dailies about urban development in the prairie provinces of Canada, which is pretty boring stuff to look at. Just big caterpillar machines scraping stuff and houses being built, and around farming areas and around wherever these urban development areas were developing, including way up in where the coal, the shale pits were, which is where the coal is now, the oil is being extracted from. So it was an important documentary for the housing division of the Canadian government. But at the end of all of this boring material, the projectionist yells to us from the back of the theater. He says, what about this other roll here that says hold for our arrival? You want to see that? So I said to the head of the camera department, Dennis Gilson, I said, yeah, we should run that. You should see this. I photographed this at that potash plant in Saskatchewan. So he runs the film. And there it is, as clear as a bell, sitting up there on the screen, exactly as I saw it, this object. It was very, very strange. No sound, no movement, no nothing. My God, says the head of the camera department, what on earth is that thing? And I said, well, I hate to use a word, but dare I say a UFO? And he said, yeah, you may be right. There's only one way to find out. Let's send it down to Project Blue Book at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. Maybe those guys will know, which they did. So Frankie Johnson, who's the secretary of the camera department, he's the head of the camera department secretary, she sent it via a courier service to Project Blue Book. And we forgot about it. I worked on another film. And then a few weeks later, I went back into her office and I said, by the way, Frankie, did we ever hear back from that place where you sent that film? Of that object that we shot in the clouds. She said, oh, no, I'll call them in the morning, which apparently she did. And later that afternoon, she said, "Come on over to my office." And I went to her office, and she said, "Guess what?" And I said, "What?" She said, "They signed for this from the courier service. We know that they got the footage. They deny receiving it." Because what they said to me was, "What about that film that we sent you about that thing in the sky?" And they said, "What film?" And as a kid, I had been reading about UFOs ever since George Adamski wrote his first book, Flying Saucers Have Landed, and all. I was very familiar with all of this, totally fascinated, and I had always suspected that there was a cover-up, and here was adequate proof of the fact that they were denying that this had happened. So,
of course,
talk about a cover-up. I have personal proof of that. I made many, many years later, I was on a series with Leonard Nimoy called Ancient Mysteries. And
yes.
I think it was the History Channel or A&E. And one of the shows was called Ancient Encounters. This was before Ancient Aliens became a big cable show. And we looked at the history of objects in the sky. And from ancient times. And there is artwork on certain Egyptian tombs of objects in the sky. As you well know, there are paintings, there are tapestries that date back to medieval times in Europe.
Glyphs.
There are stories of the Vimanas in India, which you can see on the walls of Angkor Wat. I've seen them myself. So these things have been coming for a long, long time, and I've interviewed Zachariah Sitchin and Stanton Friedman and all of these guys. And so while I was doing this show, I thought, wow, there's also a rumor that Gordon Cooper, one of the Mercury astronauts, had seen a UFO when he was a young guy before he was an astronaut. And I thought, I wonder if I can track him down if he'll tell me that, because there was also a story that the astronauts were all sworn to secrecy. I tracked Gordon Cooper down. He'd retired from, he had an office here in Van Nuys Airport here in the Valley in LA. And I tracked him down and I went to see him one day and I said, "Colonel, do you mind if I have you in a show about UFOs?" He said, "Oh, absolutely." He was only too pleased to do that. And I said, what was there any truth in the fact that you'd seen UFOs when you were a young fighter pilot? He said, "Of course. When I joined NASA, we all had a sign, was sworn to secrecy, to never discuss any sightings like that with the press or the public ever. But I have decided to break rank with that because I have seen them myself." And when I was based at Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany, one day we were scrambled in our F-86 Sabres to chase this object in the sky, and we tried to catch up with this thing. It was absolutely impossible, and it would shoot across the sky like 1,000 miles an hour and come to a dead stop. And as we would approach it to try and get a photograph of it, it would just zoom away and then come to another dead stop. It was behaving like no physical object, no physical man-made object could behave. It was not of this world. And and he said, and I'll tell you something. He said, a lot of my buddies in NASA has seen things, but I'm not allowed to talk. I won't speak for them, but I can speak for myself. So now I'm going to tell you something else. One day, I have a friend who was a pilot for the Lockheed Skunk Works here in Burbank. And one day he calls me up, and this is 95 or 96, and he says, "I'm filming tomorrow at Mojave Airport because this guy could fly anything." And this was the days when there was that aviation channel, if you remember that. I think it used to be on the History Channel, which is now the History Channel. There was this aviation channel, and Neil Armstrong was the host of a series called The Story of Flight. He was the host of the series. So he would sort of top and tail the shows with an intro and, a few statements at the end of it. And he was going to be at Mojave Air Force Base one day when this friend of mine was going to fly a 1950s era British jet called a Gloucester Meteor from Mojave. He could fly anything, this guy. Skip Holmes was his name. So I went with him to Mojave, and I had met Neil Armstrong once before, but didn't have an opportunity to speak with him. But on the set that day, while they were filming this Gloucester Meteor jet, and my friend flying it and doing all sorts of sexy things in the sky with it, I had a lot of time to talk to Neil Armstrong. And so comes the lunch hour, and the director calls, okay, lunch, we have an hour's break, and the catering truck arrives, and I said to him, Colonel, do you mind if I take lunch with you? And he said, yeah, sure, absolutely. It was as hot as can be. You can't believe how hot it was that day. So I said, let's go and sit in the camera truck and turn on the air conditioning, and we can have our lunch in peace. Just sit in the cab of the truck. He said, sure, I'll join you. And so we did that. And I went and sat in the driver's seat. He sat in the passenger seat of the camera truck. I turned on the air conditioning. And halfway through the meal, I thought, dare I risk this? Dare I ask him about the fact that I had heard many rumors that he and Aldrin and Collins had seen things in the sky when they were on Apollo 11. And not only that, but that they had seen things on the surface of the moon.
I take it you did?
And so I said to him, Colonel, I want to ask you something. Yeah, he says. Now, he was a very shy, quiet guy. And I think what made him that way was the experience of Apollo 11 and what they saw on the moon. Because he looked at me askance like this and he says, what? And I said, those rumors about that fact that you and Aldrin had maybe seen something on the moon. And he said, stop. And I said, well, but tell me, is there any truth in that? And he just put his plate on the dashboard of the vehicle and he looked at me and he said, you didn't ask me that, and I'm certainly not going to answer it. And I didn't need to hear any more than that to know that in actual fact, it was all true, that he had seen something, because that was very evident to me. He was still adhering to his code of ethics. He was not going to spill the beans. He was not going to break rank, but something definitely had affected him, and he'd seen that. Well, I mean, we know from the guy, Edgar Mitchell, another Apollo astronaut, started the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and he says, there's more to the universe. There's more life in the universe than we know. Well, of course, anybody who thinks there isn't must be out of his mind, out of his or her mind. I talked to Carl Sagan about this. I did a wonderful show, a retrospective of the Voyager mission. After Voyager got to the planet Neptune in 1991, I did a show called Sail on Voyager for PBS. And I had an opportunity of spending some time with Carl Sagan, Mr.
Wow.
Billions and billions and billions of stars.
Billions. Yeah, right.
Yeah. And I said to him, I know you don't believe in UFOs and all the rest of it. He said, oh, don't give me that stuff. I said, yeah, but let's just talk about extraterrestrial life. What do you feel about that? He said, of course there's extraterrestrial intelligent life. How can there not be? Of course. But I don't buy into all this UFO stuff and, little old ladies driving their trucks across Oklahoma saying that they've got Venusian lovers and lovers from Mars and all this kind of I don't buy into that stuff at all. But extraterrestrial intelligent life, of that there is no question. Of course there is. And no doubt we are being visited right now. And maybe this is the year of disclosure. People are saying, well,
I sure hope so.
Maybe this is the year of disclosure. I mean, look at that footage that was released recently by the Navy, of those two guys flying off the USS Nimitz.
Yeah, that's admission right there.
And the footage that they got, it's just extraordinary. Yeah, I mean,
Mr. Friedberg, thank you. We're at the end of the show. I really appreciate your time, sir. It really, your stories are phenomenal. What a rich, full life you still living.
Well, thank you, Keith. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Would you leave us with a closing thought? I always ask that of my guests.
I think that, the takeaway for me about my life is just you've got to have an open mind about everything and anything, and don't buy into everything and don't be gullible, but have an absolutely open mind. And one of the most important lessons that I have learned in my time is be respectful, even if you don't understand other cultures, other ideas, or whatever it is. Approach the world with respect and with some degree of compassion, because you don't know everything, and we're all connected somewhere or another. We're all interlocked into some kind of weird force field grid, call it whatever you like. We're all one. Be respectful of that.
Thank you again, sir. I really appreciate your time. Everyone, the links to my guest tonight or in the forums. I would love a round two if that's okay with you, sir.
I'd love it. Anytime.
Everyone, Keith Anthony Blanchard, Mr. Friedberg, if you can, stick around for a second. I'd love to chat with you in the green room. Keith Anthony Blanchard is Center of Light Radio. Let me find my outro music. I like my outro music. It shows my spiritual band, Lavender Soul, which we're going to hopefully do a new album soon, but I'm definitely going to be doing an album on my own very soon. Center of Light Radio. I love what I do, or you're doing what you love. There really is nothing else. Speaking with Lionel reminds me of this thought I had to do this In Search Of kind of documentary series called In Search of God, so to speak, and have a team go to the Himalayan caves because it said there's a monk that lives up there and so forth, and we'd go around the world and do this wonderful production of looking for the truth. That connection that we all are a part of is embodied all over this earth, and don't be surprised when you look in the mirror if it looks just like you. You will love beyond measure.